Well, our reporter Aldrin Sampear joins us via Skype from Stockholm for the latest. Thank you for joining us, Aldrin. How serious do the experts say is the threat of water shortages globally?
Good evening, Mahendra. It's quite serious. There was a general consensus that if this issue is not dealt with, one day water would become the basis of conflicts, not only in Africa but also around the world, because this is a global issue. And that's really what some of these delegates have been coming here to discuss, and finding solutions as to what exactly it is that nations can do, as well as you and I, for instance. Another thing that the minister mentioned when I was speaking to her is that when we flush our toilets, we know that it is clean, drinkable water that goes down the drain, and then you have villages still in desperate need of that water. And the conundrum, for instance, that I was speaking about earlier on, that government faces is that they need to roll out water, make sure that every household has clean running water. But at the same time, they don't have enough resources to purify that water. And that's the reason why we're facing some of the shortages that have already been experienced in KwaZulu-Natal as well as the Western Cape. And the minister emphasizing there that if that does not happen, where we change our attitude and how we use water, we could find ourselves in a situation where we experience water shedding, quite similar to load shedding.
Now, Aldrin, there is the question of desalination. You know, it's costly, but maybe it's one option to take. Are they talking about that?
Quite strangely, there hasn't been any emphasis on desalination, and it's probably because of the cost that's involved right there. And it's quite strange when you look at islands, for instance, where we heard some of the submissions made by prime ministers here of small islands indicating that they're also facing a water crisis. And you ask yourself, but how do you face a water crisis when you're surrounded by water? And considering South Africa's borders of entry, about 75% is on coastal land. And you ask yourself, why don't we use that water? And I guess those are just some of the issues that these delegates would have to sit down and discuss and see whether it will be a viable option one day when maybe South Africa or the continent, the African continent, feels that it has enough money to go that route.
That's a very good point. Now, climate change is a hotly debated issue at the Water Week meeting. What makes it so important here?
Well, it is an important issue. The Prime Minister of Sweden also saying today that he hopes that when this conference ends on Friday, there will be some sort of agreement that will influence COP21, which will be happening in Paris later this year. And I think it's in November, yes, that it will be taking place. And there has been a lot of emphasis that we need to understand that there is that relationship between climate change as well as the availability of drinkable water. Some of the submissions again made by these small islands is that they find themselves submerging in the ocean. I think it was the Jordanian Prime Minister who also said that he fears that the Dead Sea will dry up because of climate change, and if we don't take a stand, if we don't take issues of sanitation quite seriously, there will be a crisis.
Now, Aldrin, are there specific areas in the debates that are facing a more urgent need?
Well, there are some issues, and like I was just indicating now, the issue around sanitation, and the minister saying that we need to see more women getting involved in issues around sanitation because they feel that they've been more affected, considering how much water, as the minister says, women need. And there's another issue where, for instance, in African villages, where it is the women's job to go and fetch the water, and she says that needs to change, and that's the reason why we need to make sure that we roll out these infrastructures and make sure that every house has running water. But then, of course, that problem around the availability of that drinkable water.
Now, Aldrin, what are some of the innovative inventions that must have been introduced at this meeting?
Well, for instance, I like this idea around the dry toilets, which means that you don't use water to get rid of waste. And considering that what's happening in South Africa, the government has that goal of making sure that every household has proper sanitation. The proper sanitation meaning that it has a toilet which flushes. But now the world is moving away from that. The world is now moving into a sphere where they have a dry sanitation or dry toilets where you don't have to use water, and that waste is actually then used as fertilizer. And the minister, as well as the Water Research Council, said that that's actually something that the country should be looking at, and maybe we should be going that route as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Joining us from Skype, that was Aldrin Sampear in Stockholm, Sweden.